Thank you, thank you, thank you. Cool. So, welcome to my talk. It's title. I shortened it a little because I know I had a super long title. So, VQA, a new window into pixel pushing. So, who is that face? That face is me. My name is Walter Dziemianczyk. I'm a senior software engineer at the New York Times, and that's my Twitter handle if you want to spam me on Twitter. So I've worked on many different projects at the New York Times, but most of them have to deal with UI. So, straight to the point. What is VQA? Visual Quality Assurance. So, as you're writing standard code, you have, if you're lucky, you have a QA department, you have some QA engineers to help you test that code. You'll have unit tests and you'll have integration tests, but they're kind of like the last line of defense. So VQA kind of needs that sort of framework as well. So QA will usually use like Appium or Espresso, and they'll write their own tests. I know Ali, shout out to you. You're awesome. He's our senior QA engineer. He does that for us, but our product designers and creative directors also need some sort of tooling to help them with that. VQA isn't only just pixel pushing, and it can't be. You have more than just a pixel on the screen, right? It has to do a lot with maintaining brand identity. So what is brand identity? It can't just be an 8-point design system, right? A grid system, or 16-dip margins, or a toolbar, a collapsing toolbar, a view pager, what have you. It's more of expressing your brand through the UI. So at the New York Times, we have a really strong brand identity. Every single day we ship a paper, and the top of that paper has the New York Times logo at the top. So it's an international paper, and everybody knows this logo, or they know the super T, which is just the T, if you ever see that, like on my sweatshirt. So in order to translate the newspaper into something digital, we have a bunch of documentation that the product designers use. So this is an example of Franklin. It's one of our typefaces. And there are different whole set of styles. And it kind of gives you a description of when you can and can't use this typeface, what it should be used for. But this style guide, it's only page 9. And there are a whole bunch of more pages defining when you should use the entire nameplate as opposed to the super T, how you should treat these icons or these nameplates, what you can and can't do with them, what you can and can't do with different typefaces like Karnak, what colors you can use, and what are the colors for different products. So the design department has that, and that's great, but eventually you're going to have to, hand this stuff off. Or you need a tool or a set of tools to implement this sort of stuff. So how do we implement brand identity? And that's usually, I'm about to lose power. That's not good. 1 second. 1 second, please hold. So we have Photoshop, right? And that's our standard design tool that everybody's used. But that's really mostly for raster content, right? So Photoshop has a whole assortment of different tooling that you can use to, filter, photos and crop them and so on and so forth. So when I initially started development, I was a design technologist, and that was like 6 years ago, more than that. And the type of designs that I would have to implement, which was what that role was in PSDs. And I'd get raw PSD files from clients, and I'd have to implement them. And that's great, but not so great. Now, there's a newer tool, and that newer tool is called Sketch. And Sketch is more geared towards digital designs, digital interfaces. So It still shares some of the same problems as Photoshop, but I will get into that. Then lastly, you have Figma, and Figma is an awesome tool that you should definitely use, and I suggest you you check it out. So the problem with Photoshop and Sketch is that they rely on Zeplin. So if you haven't used Zeplin, you should check it out. And that's basically controlling your history, your revision history, like in Git. And it's important to have that because if you don't, then you'll be chasing around source files. And that is terrible, and you should not do that. So if you are using Photoshop or Sketch, check out Zeplin. But if you can use Figma, I think Figma is also a bit more kind to your wallet in terms of like you can have, I think, like unlimited projects, and Figma is just one single design file. The reason why that's awesome is because it's this same file a designer uses to mock up the content is the same file that the developer's using. So it's essentially like a Google Docs of design, because you can also comment in there. There's revision history that you can go through. And then it's the standard tool set that I'm pretty sure Sketch has, right? So single source of truth is super important. Just because if I don't have a single source of truth, you know, eventually that's gonna bring up some really terrible problems. So even if I am using the latest and greatest in design technology, it doesn't really solve all of our problems, because you still have dependencies, and this isn't more towards like software dependency. It's like I am still dependent as a developer. I am still dependent on design to produce this content. And if the content's not right, they're responsible for giving me that content, right? So it ends up being this kind of one-way conversation where there's usually a handoff. If you're in consulting, they'll probably have an iOS app and they'll want to convert it to Android. And you know, they already have their designs already implemented, and it's going to be super similar. But the conversation really ends there. You get that content, and that's kind of the end of the story. It's up to you to implement that or translate that into whichever way you want. Kind of coming away from consulting, you kind of still see that, which, you know, like, so what? Well, you'll implement a design, right? You'll get the Sketch or Figma or Photoshop file, and then you implement it, right? And it depends on your implementation. If you know, if you don't make your UI flexible and you do like some nested frame layouts and a linear layout and a relative layout and, you know, do all that stuff, you may end up, you know, having to rewrite all of that, and that sucks. Also, if you get a design that has like a collapsing toolbar, but you don't really see it, that design is one snapshot in the interaction, right? You don't get this full-fledged multi-frame video, or I mean, you may if you're lucky, but you don't really see that, right? So you'll get feedback when you implement a design. You sit down with the designer, and you'll get feedback saying, like, this seems off. Well, what is off? Like, put a number, you know, to off. Tell me that. Like, we should make this bigger, you know, define bigger. And then the dreaded, is this version the latest? Which, if you're using Figma, okay, you know, you'll get that, the latest content there. If you're using Zeplin, fine. But if you're not, then it's really trying to hunt down these design files, right? So maybe it's in your Gmail or Dropbox or Google Drive. I don't know, maybe someone airdropped it to you and it's on like a USB thumbstick. I don't know if people still use thumbsticks, but you end up crying a lot. So don't cry. That's not good. So VQA is tedious. Just because it's not a fluent conversation, or it really should be a more fluent conversation, but the designer isn't fiddling around with Android Studio, and I don't think a developer although I do, I'm guilty of this, I don't think a developer should be fiddling around with the design tools. And until there's this convergence of tooling, you know, that's always going to be there. So it's also not easy for the examples I brought up before. It depends on your implementation. If you don't, you know, if you're not as flexible as possible with your implementation, that may bite you in the end. So here's a great example. I have this source file, and this is in Sketch. Great. It's just got my title, a toolbar, and I got hello world, globe, and earth. So hello world within this the white content frame, that's centered. And then globe is dependent on that. It's to the bottom of that without any margin. And then earth, same thing to globe, right? And then if I implement this in Figma, same story, everything aligns. I was surprised to see that, cool. But now I implement it, right? And what I see is that my content is not aligned perfectly with the expected result, right? So hello world, it's a smidge off, but then you get to globe, and then you get to earth, right? So let's say I have my toolbar, and the designer says, I want my toolbar to be 48 dips instead of the standard 56 that AppCompat provides you. Then what do? Then you may get into the process where you build out this entire UI, you build out your recycler view with your adapter and your list items, and those list items are using like a constraint layout, which is great, but everything is eventually going to be off because the bounds of the text labels in Figma or in Sketch are not going to be equal to the view bounds of the Android implementation. So you really end up having to rinse and repeat. What this means is like, you take the expected product. That was a screenshot before, right? You take that, and then you bring it into the design tool. And then you have to manually drag guidelines onto the screen to make sure that your baselines within a horizontal, that was only horizontal, but also in the vertical orientation, like those things have to align. So how can we improve productivity? That's a big time sink. I can't spend half a day, pushing rulers from the edge of the screen in Photoshop and comparing and contrasting. So how do I reduce that time, right? And more so, like, how do I make that process more proactive in a sense of, like, I am one person, and I work 40-ish hours a week, maybe a smidge more from time to time. But how can I offload that work onto somebody else? And that's where this tool that I wrote comes in. Or it tries to help solve that or soften the blow of that process, right? So window is what it's called. And it's a result of those questions. And it's an attempt to help solve that process. So what does it do? Well, I'll show you with some magical videos that I have. Basically, you long press on the home button. You have a configuration app, and you can put guidelines or columns. You can enable or disable different like groups, I call them. And then you can compare distances between all your views that you kind of take a snapshot of. So Google Assistant works in a very similar way, even though they seem like two totally different products. And Google Assistant, you long press on home and it pops up this bottom sheet. And for a split second, you'll see what's on my screen and share a screenshot. So this is important. This is very important. So how does it work? Well, there's this thing called a voice interaction service, right? That spools up, and that creates a voice interaction session. And this is kind of the main thing, the cream of the crop. It returns a bitmap and a view node. So this bitmap is the screenshot. So from Google Assistant, you can share the screenshot, and that is that. Then you have a view node, and a view node is basically, it takes the views in hierarchy, and it converts them. And it basically, like, it's metadata around the view. It doesn't tell you everything around the view. It doesn't tell you, like, typeface, or there is a text color field, but that's always 0, I think, defaulted. It's just positional information, and then it may give you some text. But that's really all we need for window also. So this is the only code that you're going to see, which is great. So there's really just 3 sets of methods in this voice interaction session. There's a way of creating this view, which is that bottom sheet. In my case, it's just a view that draws a bunch of lines on the screen, right? And once you inflate that view, you return it, and then set content view is your on view created. So once you do that, then you have your life cycle, which is on show and on hide. So this session could last multiple long presses of the home button. So this is when you do your cleanup if you have some listeners going on. And then finally is the magical methods of on-handle assist and on-handle screenshot. So on-handle assist gives you this thing called an assist structure. Within there is a view node. So you'll see, nope. You'll see root view node right here. And that's basically a representation of one window. So if you have an activity, that's one window. Let's say you also have a dialogue, and that's another window. So within here, magical numbers are bad, but I have a magical number of 0, and that's going to be our activity. If you have a dialogue on top of the activity, that's going to be the index of 1. So you'd usually, if you have like a notification, then, you know, that's some way that you can handle swapping indices. And then that's our view hierarchy. And then on-handle screenshot returns this bitmap. And you don't necessarily need the bitmap, but I do pinch to zoom. So that's where the bitmap comes in. So like I mentioned earlier, it's all about the canvas. It's just a bunch of lines, a bunch of rectangles. You saw some flashing stuff. There's no views involved, just the root view. Everything is calling onto the Canvas API and drawing rectangles or lines. So we need this to be API 23. I'd love it if it was 21 or less than 21, but that's not, you know, the new hotness anymore. But there's API limitations on what methods are accessible. So there is support for Android Q, which is in my branch right now that I have to release for Q preview. But the way that you'd set window as the assistant app on the system was kind of not a hack, but you know, wasn't the best way. So Android Q brings in a role manager with a role, and a role is basically one single behavior that an app can execute, like an internet browser or a music player. This is not a public role, it's a private role, but there is a role for assistant. So hopefully that doesn't disappear. But time will tell. So the last thing is that you don't need a library to integrate. So for something like Flipper, Flipper's a product by Facebook, and that product lets you interact with your emulator from this separate program, and you can manipulate the view bounds and margins and stuff like that. And it's a really great tool. The only thing is that you have to integrate it within your app. With this is overlaid on top of an activity, and it could be any activity. So it could be, you know, you can inspect, you know, Facebook's app or, you know, Twitter or the New York Times app if you want. So how do I enable it? Well, you'll see this big red box if it's disabled. You click on that, and it opens up the assistant voice input screen, which will then let you select which one you want. So this, that's okay. So once I select window, I'll be ushered back into this screen, and that means that, that it's active. So it's very important for these two settings to be enabled. Because one gives me the screenshot, and then the second gives me the current view hierarchy. So I use both of those things to display and then draw rulers on top of. So once you have it enabled, then you can go back into the window app just by pressing back, and then you'll have some basic quality of life settings. Then you'll have the ability to add grids. And then rulers on top of that. So grids will be, it can just be vertical and horizontal lines to make a grid. You can also do columns that stretch, that have an offset. For rulers, you can have rulers that start from the left of the screen or the right, or the start and the end from the top and the bottom. They can use dips, inches, pixels, and percentages. So you can have a ruler that's 50% vertical and 50% horizontal. And then lastly, there's this outline category, where this is just the default implementation that is currently being used within the app. So in a future update, and I'll get into it, I'll add some functionality here to help you customize that. So each of these sections, there's 3, you can disable those. There may be a lot of noise going on with all of them enabled at the same time. So you can go back here and disable it, and the next time you long press on home, you won't see that option anymore, or you will, depending on what you choose. So let's use Hangouts, because Hangouts is about to die, I think, sometime soon. So let's give it some glory. So if I have my Hangouts app, I long press on the home button, right? And then I'll get my default, whatever thing I configured. This is the default, where you'll have a 16 dip start ruler or start guide, and a 16 dip end guide, and then your text is this pink, and the images are teal, and anything that can't be detected is gray. So if I do a single tap, I tapped on to the hamburger, right? That'll highlight, everything else will kind of, be darkened. And then I'll get positional information from the left, top, right, and bottom. And if it's 0, it doesn't draw. So if I hit back, then I'm ushered back into the default. If I hit back again, then it disables the app, and I can use Hangouts however I like. So if we do another interaction, if I single tap on this empty view image that they have, right, and I long press on the toolbar, now I'm getting positional information between 2 elements, right? So if you're using this and you can't quite get into the element, you can double tap as well, and that'll keep digging into the view hierarchy until you reach the root. So within here, the distance between them is 148 dips. So another option, like I mentioned, is rulers based on percentage. They're relative position based on percentage of screen width or screen height, also with columns. So that's the basic gist of the tool. So what does the future include? That's important. So I want to improve rulers, because right now you have to go back and forth. The normal interaction I have with rulers in Figma, like I'm just dragging stuff from the left and top and everything's super quick, and I want that same sort of behavior to be within this window app. So I want you to be able to drag a ruler from the left side of the screen or the right side of the screen, or top or bottom. I want to show some sort of measurements. When you zoom in, you'll see dips at the top. I also want to have a persistent notification, so that way then you know it's active. With the role manager or the implementation right now, there's no way of telling whether a window is inactive. So if you stop using the tool and then you want like Google Assistant to come back, you have to go back into Google settings and disable it, which I wish I had control, but I don't. So hence the persistent notification. And that also gives me a place where I can put some features that I really want within that space. So Like I mentioned, custom groups. I want you to be able to put in the ID of a view and select a color and have that thing be the only visible. If you don't care about your text views or image views or a web view, you know, like you should be able to hide those things. Improve touch interaction. So this isn't like a standard view hierarchy where you're tapping on something and things propagate. It's all manual, which if you're like, there was a case where someone was faking a bottom sheet and that view was covering their list view, right? So there's some detection in there, some crazy, I don't want to call it an algorithm, but an algorithm that tries to detect whether a view or a view group is not important. So if I long press on, say, inbox, well, rest in peace, Gmail, and they're using a recycler view, that will resolve into a view group. Because it'll only provide me with information from like the system API. So a list view will return a list view, but a recycler view or a constraint layout will return a view group. And that's where that challenge comes into play. But I just need better math, so I'm gonna do some better math there. And then finally some metadata, and that's what I also want the notification for. If you can't get to the view that you want selected, I want the ability for you to see the entire view hierarchy list and be able to dig into whatever you want. So, what else? Well, good question. This is Hangouts, but this does not look what I showed you before, right? It looks a little weird. There's some dotted lines, some crazy blue colors. If you fade that stuff out, you see this, right? And this is a representation of that view hierarchy, but without any UI components. And that's because this is an SVG, right? So this is the entire view hierarchy that I have that is then written out into the SVG. So you'll see, you saw it for a split second there was Hangouts. That Hangouts is the label in the toolbar. You also saw some text in there, which was the empty text. That was the empty text, right? That's how Google Assistant works. It takes a snapshot of all the text fields, right? And then it reads them and sees, you know, what's in view, and that's how it knows what to search for. So the reason why the SVG is important is, like, this is using still view nodes, but I love to one day, and if you want to take this idea, please do, I want the ability to create my UI as an SVG and send that off to a designer. So it's gonna involve so much work, but one day in maybe the near future, I'll be able to draw, you know, corner radiuses and images within this SVG, and this SVG will probably be massive, but that's okay. And then that will solve this next question, right? Why does Window exist? Well, it's because this tool is trying to move work back into, the designers, right? Or to standard QA, or to really anybody else, or if there's a product quality assurance step in your process. Like, I have enough work to do. Like, I need to rip out Kotlin and write some Java, right? Or, you know, whatever. Like, I want to try and offload that work. So if that tickles your fancy, you can download Window. You can search it in the Play Store. For just write Window VQA, or you can go to that URL and download it, play with it. Let me know. My Twitter handle is at the bottom of the slide. So you can spam me if you want feature requests. Let me know. I'll see what I can do. And that's it. Thank you.